Hi guys, in this video we are going to analyze the poem Remains, and the first thing we look at is context. So here's the main context that you need to know, and it says that the poem Remains is based on a British soldier who served in the Iraq War, and this soldier is suffering from PTSD. And Armitage's main purpose of writing this poem is that he wanted to raise the issue that there's not enough support from the army for those who are suffering from PTSD. So that is the key context that you need to know. The next thing we need to look at is the form of the poem. So here we can see that the form is that there is no regular line length and there's also no rhyme, so the poem is like a story. So once we've looked at context and form, we look at the attitudes that are in the poem. So here are the attitudes. And it says nonchalance and guilt. Now, if you don't know what nonchalance means, the definition is calmness, so there's no concern. And a lot of in the poem we can see a lot of this attitude as well as guilt. So once we've looked at the attitudes as well, we need to think about what other poems we can link Remains to. So here's a list of the poems we can link to. These are not the only poems we can link. It just depends on the question that you get. So if it's the effects of war, if it's the links to memory, anything like that. So we just link based on what the question is. And these are normally to do with the effects of war and how the people are suffering through war, or kind of so mainly these are for links to war and the effects of war. So now we're going to go on to actually looking at the poem. But before we start, we just need to understand it. So I'm just going to go through a quick summary of the poem. So it's about a group of soldiers who shoot a man who's robbed a bank. And this man's death is described very graphically. And then the soldier recalling the story can't get the man's death out of his head, and he seems to be haunted by it. So that's just a quick overview of the poem. So now we're going to look at the first quote. So remember, as I always say, these are not the only quotes you can zoom in on. You can pick any quote as long as you can explain it and link it back to the question. So the first quote that I've picked says, probably armed, possibly not. And this is repetition. And it's highlighting the continuous guilt and remorse that the soldier's feeling, that he can't even remember the key parts of the key thing. So he doesn't remember if the man was armed or not. And it could potentially mean that he's questioning his actions. So that's a very key quote that we need to look at. And the reason I'm saying that is quite key is because it's repeated again over here. So this is just the beginning of the poem and he's already feeling the guilt. So we can just keep that in mind, that quote. Now the next quote that we're going to pick is right here. So at the beginning, when I was saying in the summary, how the death of the man is very graphically described, this is what I was talking about. So it says, I see every round as it rips through his life. Now the first thing we do is look at the language feature, is hyperbole. So it's an exaggeration of what's actually happening. And it's highlighting how violent and grotesque this image was that was going through the soldier's mind. And remember that when the soldiers came back, a lot of them suffered from PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. And it was because of these traumatic events that they had issues when they came back from war. And it's also potentially highlighting that those who were shot were very weak. So that was the second quote that we went through. And the next quote is here. So again, we're looking at the way that the death of the man is described very graphically. But here it's slightly different because we're highlighting on this violent verb here. So tosses his guts back into his body. Now this violent verb is highlighting and emphasizing how careless the soldiers are and their brutality. They have no respect. They're disrespectful and they do not value the dead body. And this could also link to the reasons why people had PTSD, because of such violence and graphic images that the trauma they've been through is so intense. So the next quote we're looking at is this one right here. And it says, "End of story, except not really." Now this can be seen as a volta, so a turning point. Could be seen as the part where the PTSD actually starts. So the soldier has been through all of this graphic, traumatic, this incident, and now it's really getting to him and the PTSD is starting. So the trauma of war is with you eternally now. So that's what it's highlighting. The trauma of war is always with you. And so let's write that one first. Now, this could also be a mood shift, and it could be where the soldier is realizing his actions and is exposing the hidden reality of war. So is looking at the after effects of the soldiers. So now that we've looked at what the soldier's been through, we're now moving on to what happens after. So the after effects of it, and they're quite serious. And there's a link to guilt here, the attitude of guilt, because now it's creeping up. Now it's starting to come through. So he says, "End of story, except not really." So now is the real beginning of his life. So how it's affecting his life once he's come back from war. Now, this quote illustrates that point very well. So it's how he's trying to deal with his emotions, what he's going through. And it says, "And the drink and the drugs won't flush him out." So there's repetition of "and." And also we see, so there's the other one. And also we see that there's drink and there's drugs in this sentence, in this quote. So he's tried everything, even everything that's dangerous. So drinking and drugs are dangerous for him. But he's tried it through desperation, just to try and get that trauma out of his mind, to try and relax. So remember that this is done in desperation. And it's going back to the point where Armitage wanted to highlight the fact that the army does nothing to help the soldiers who are suffering from PTSD. So this is a very good link back to context if you want to do that at the end of your paragraphs. Now, the last quote that I'm going to look at is here. And it's the very last line of the poem. It says, "His bloody life in my bloody hands." Now, there's repetition here of bloody. And it's highlighting or emphasizing the eternal guilt and the trauma that this soldier will have for the rest of his life. And once again, it's linking back to that same point that Armitage wants to raise of how little the army do to help and support those who have PTSD, who have been through such traumatic events, and it's impacted their life so much. They even try things that are dangerous in desperation just to try and get those memories, get rid of them. So this last line is very key, because it's showing that even at the end of the poem, the guilt is still that it hasn't got rid of, and there's nothing that's been done to help the soldier. So that was the analysis of Remains by Simon Armitage. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Thank you very much for watching.